Now we're ready, and we're starting a new chapter. He's back in Europe again. That's the title of our chapter. It seemed a little singular to be where the sun does not set at this time of the year and until nearly 9:30, rising in the morning between 2 and 3, with twilight nearly all night. So wrote Elder Haskell from Moss, Norway, to his friends back home. It was midsummer of the year 1887, and he was attending the very first Seventh-day Adventist camp meeting ever held in Europe. There were only 8 family tents pitched in a picturesque grove on an island in the bay near the border of Norway and Sweden. Many of the campers were obliged to find lodging elsewhere, as the tents ordered from America did not arrive in time for the meeting. A newspaper, the Morgenposten, had this and much more to say about the encampment. Quote, "The tents are very fine and pleasant, and generally arranged for 2 families. At first, we come into a small, everyday room which stretches across the whole breadth of the tent and is covered with carpet. The walls are decorated with green leaves and flowers. Altogether, we receive the impression that the people occupying these tents be an economical and well-to-do people. Nothing was seen in the line of taking up collections, for which the Adventists deserve praise. Besides the 100 living in the camp, there are about 50 persons taking part in the meetings who live in different places in the city. There are also in the camp about 40 children. Wouldn't it be nice to have that many children in our camp? We could do so much, couldn't we? About 40 children belonging to the Sabbath schools in Christiana. The article also describes the assembly tent, the tent for the sale of books, and the tent where victuals could be obtained. It outlines the daily camp program and states that the campers will stay on the island for a week longer than at first intended, not leaving until June 21. During this extended week, the 5th annual session of the European Council was held. In Basel 5 years previously, Elder Haskell had assisted in organizing the council. At that time, there were only a few isolated believers and groups of Adventists scattered throughout Europe. Now, through God's providence, the last day message had extended to 4 countries of Central Europe, the British Isles, Scandinavia, and southern Russia. The territory had been divided into conferences and mission fields, and a director appointed over each. Representatives from each area were sent to the council. Stephen Haskell, J.H. Waggoner, D.A. Robinson, and Charles Boyd were some of those from the United States. Ellen G. White and her son William were also there from Switzerland as delegates at large. They had spent 2 years helping organize and establish the work in Europe. Cheering reports were brought in from nearly all parts of Europe. Tracts, periodicals, and books in increasing numbers were being published in various European languages. The few ministers spread thinly over Europe traveled from place to place, searching for interested persons and groups, holding Bible studies and meetings in private homes, baptizing converts, and seeking to establish them in the faith. These workers frequently found people who had read themselves into the message from literature sent them through the various tract and missionary societies. The reports mentioned a few small but well-established churches in Switzerland, Germany, France, Italy, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. There was a strong church in Southampton where Elder Loughborough had conducted evangelistic lectures when he first arrived in England. William Ings had placed tract distribution racks in many public places in Southampton. He had also placed them in more than 100 London restaurants and in many hotels in Switzerland. He encouraged the Swiss believers to continue this practice, that seeds of the last day message might be scattered by thousands of homeward bound vacationers. It was also reported that at one time R.F. Andrews and S.H. Lane had spent about 4 weeks in Ireland, searching out interested persons and holding Bible studies with them, including one sister who had been keeping the Sabbath alone for 7 years. Tent meetings were being promoted in Norway and Sweden. There had been some persecution in Denmark, and several colporteurs had been arrested. A report of experiences in southern Russia aroused intense interest. As a result of a few evening meetings in private homes, a number had accepted the Sabbath. This set the magistrates in pursuit of the new teachers, but they received warning in time and fled to another city where they continued working quietly until discovered and forced to flee again. Thus they scattered seeds of truth, and a spirit of inquiry was awakened in many places. Even in Siberia, staunch-hearted colporteurs were carrying the message from door to door. L.R. Conradi told the council how almost exactly a year before he and a German brother in Russia had spent 40 days in prison. And I know Conradi, I think it's this instance, has written that up, or at least he reported it at a general conference session, and it's written up. Interesting. At this Fifth European Council, conference business and deliberations occupied most of the time, or much time. The publishing work received much attention. Manuscripts must be prepared and translated, then printed. The need for colporteur training schools was stressed. The vote was passed to operate a colporteur's school in each mission for at least 3 months a year. 2 such institutes had been held in Scandinavia during the past year, each extending over a period of 3 months. Elder Madison had described one of these training schools, quote, "Instructions in canvassing are given 3 times a week, and we have recitations in bookkeeping, Swedish grammar, and English twice a week, and in arithmetic, writing, and singing once. At the same time, we have lectures on the prophecies and practical religion 3 times a week, prayer meeting, Sabbath evening, and Sabbath school Sabbath afternoon. The classes meet every morning at 7 o'clock, but the time from 9 until 3 is devoted to canvassing the city." At the close of the council, Elder Haskell, feeling greatly refreshed and spiritually strengthened, took up his new duties in England. Early in July, Ellen G. White and her party, on their way back to America, arrived there. A group of missionaries en route from America to Africa were also in England waiting for their ship to Cape Town. They united in a praying session and felt the Spirit of the Lord in their midst as they held parting meeting, the parting meeting. The next day, Mrs. White hired a carriage and with friends drove to the steamer to visit the group bound for Africa. She wrote, "We could not restrain our tears as we parted from them with them, not knowing that we should ever meet again in this life, and not knowing to what they would be subjected in becoming established in their far off new field of labor." A few days later, her group sailed for America. Elder Haskell now entered upon his new assignment in England as editor of the journal Present Truth. In anticipation of this, he had brought from America numerous cuts with which to illustrate its pages. The printing plant was moved from Grimsby to a suburb of London, thus carrying out a proposal he had made in England 5 years earlier. Besides, 2 rooms were rented in the city in Paternoster Row, then the great book center of the world. One room would be used as a distributing center for publications, a sort of book and Bible house, and the other as a place in which to hold Bible studies. His secretary, and this is interesting, his secretary was young William A. Spicer, a future president of the GC. Haskell now focused his attention on establishing a Bible instructor's training school in London. 3 young American women, Jenny Owen, Helen McKinnon, and Hetty Hurd, had arrived from America to begin Bible work and to train new converts as house-to-house teachers. After searching several weeks for a favorable location, Elder Haskell rented a large house, the Callaniers, not far from the publishing establishment. The mission family was housed upstairs. On the ground floor, a large room was equipped as an assembly hall. At this time, there was only one known Sabbath-keeping Adventist among the millions of London. Elder Haskell visited various places throughout England where efforts were being made to organize companies and churches. The work was progressing steadily, but not as rapidly as in his homeland, yet he wrote in his usual cheerful manner, quote, "God selected this nation to be the guardians of the Bible. It is here that the first Bible Society was organized, which has sent out over 112 million volumes of the Word of God. The Bible has been sent by this people to all the nations of the earth. God will not pass by a nation that has done so great and noble a work without giving them the light of the closing work of the gospel." He joined Elders Loughborough, Durland, John, Lane, and others who were conducting evangelistic campaigns in halls and tents, and he himself conducted Bible lectures for several weeks in Southampton. The paper, Present Truth, was prospering. Its circulation had reached 5,000. From London, it was sent to the far corners of the earth. 1,000 copies went to South Africa and 600 to Nova Scotia, filling subscription lists that had been worked up largely by the New England Tract Societies. As always, when new centers of light and truth were opened, there was bitter opposition. Elder Haskell later wrote, It would seem that Satan had laid every plan to prevent the establishment of the work in this country, but God is greater than the power of the enemy, and with the united prayers of nearly 1,000 Sabbath schools and 25,000 individuals, including children, for God to open the way here in London, we shall expect that something will be accomplished. That winter, Elder Durland conducted a training school for colporteurs. In the spring, William Arnold arrived from Australia and began selling books and giving new colporteurs a practical field training in salesmanship. D.A. Robinson and his wife came from Africa and joined the Bible Instructors Training School. About a month after their arrival, the first baptism took place. Working quietly and praying constantly, the mission family was beginning to make its impression. Elder Haskell wrote, individuals come nearly half a mile to the training school to attend a class in history connected with prophecy, which is held at 6 o'clock a.m. They return to their homes for breakfast and come again at 9:30 for another exercise in Bible reading. It is more difficult to gain access to houses here than in America. But when once this is effected, the people are found to have a regard for the Bible that is not found there. Before the end of that year, 1888, a church had been organized in the great city of London. Isn't that wonderful? Elder Haskell's report from the European field when, early in September, he made a surprise appearance at the main camp meeting was one of steady progress. A few weeks later, October 17, he was appointed temporary chairman of the 27th session of the General Conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota. G.I. Butler, who had served for 8 years as General Conference president, was ill and unable to attend. It had been about 18 years since Stephen Haskell attended his first General Conference. Then there had been 22 delegates. Now there were 91. The last gathering message was extending to all nations of earth, and its light was penetrating earth's spiritual darkness. Next chapter. And just a moment here. We want to welcome. Okay, we're all here that we welcomed before. Okay, the commission to carry the three angels' messages to every nation and kindred and tongue and people had met with the response of faith by Seventh day Adventists. A beginning had been made here and there, but now numerous appeals coming from all parts of the world indicated that it was time for a great forward movement. The immensity of the task was completely out of proportion to the material resources of those responding to the call. Therefore, there must not only be undaunted faith, but also wise and economical planning in organizing and carrying out the most fruitful methods of labor. The General Conference now planned to send Stephen Haskell abroad to inspect the world field and bring back information for guidance in their immediate missionary movements. He accepted the appointment with the understanding that he would have the company of a younger man to act as his secretary and traveling agent. A brilliant Battle Creek student, Percy T. McGann, was chosen for this, and it was arranged that he should join the elder at the close of the spring term of school. Accordingly, Elder Haskell, on February 15, 1889, took passage from New York. He would spend some time holding evangelistic meetings in England and attending councils and conferences in the Scandinavian countries in company with the newly elected General Conference President O. A. Olson, who had not yet taken up his duties in America. Then, with L. Johnson, Elder Haskell visited Norland, Norway, a picturesque country described as an alpine region by the sea. Now that would be nice. They found the land occupied by a sturdy people, the greater portion of whom live along the coast on coastal islands and who make fishing their chief industry. The principal exports of the country are codfish and cod liver oil. The world is their market. The two ministers traveled mostly by water. Their steamer plying between the islands made 27 stops on the trip. Usually it anchored some distance from land, and little rowboats would paddle out with a cargo of fish and other island products and return with passengers and freight. Here the traveling brethren again witnessed the midnight sun, Elder Johnson wrote. We found no difficulty in keeping the Sabbath there, the position of the sun showing very plainly when it was night. The travelers saw huge glaciers and were almost constantly within sight of 100-mile range of snow-capped mountains, presenting a panorama of sparkling beauty and glory by day, and of fairyland enchantment at night. At Bodo, a bustling shipping port within the Arctic Circle, Elder Johnson disembarked to hold meetings with a company of Adventists. Haskell sailed to Tromsø, 200 miles north. In Tromsø, on Sunday morning, he left his hotel room looking for someone who could speak English. He found a man who said he could talk a little, and it was very little. He came across another who could talk a little more, and this man went in search for another who, they said, had spent 8 years in America. While passing down the street, Elder Haskell was recognized by a colporteur from the school in Christiana. He came to the hotel, bringing 2 other colporteurs with him. The elder had learned a few words of Norwegian, and the young man knew a few words of English, but their combined linguistic ability did not furnish them the vocabulary necessary to facilitate conversation. Finally, the man who had gone in search of the man who lived in America found him and brought him to the hotel, and they had an excellent visit. Early in August, the older missionary was joined by his young companion, McGann, who had started late and had stopped on the way to visit his childhood home in Dublin. With more than ordinary pleasure, Percy anticipated the 3 weeks' voyage to Cape Town in company with Elder Haskell and Mr. and Mrs. A. Drouillard, who were scheduled to reinforce the pioneer group there. Mrs. Drouillard had been Aunt Nell to the young man ever since she had found him a lonely, almost penniless immigrant lad working for a farmer, and had directed him toward Battle Creek College. Percy's duties were numerous. They included securing reservations, arranging transportation of baggage, exchanging coinage, watching to see that none of the 7 pieces of hand luggage were lost, stolen, or left behind, while being transported from hotel to carriage, to train, to tram car, bus, or whatever vehicle was to take them to the steamer. All this he dispatched with alacrity, not relaxing his vigilance until the numerous parcels were tucked away under cabin bunks and the overflow stored in the ship's hold. Then began the real work of the secretary, taking dictation and typing letters and articles. Pardon me, this task occupied many hours of each day and sometimes of the night, especially when urgent matters required immediate transcription in order to catch homebound steamers passing them on the high seas. One of McGann's tasks was to obtain information with which to amplify the Haskell articles. This necessitated the spending of much stopover time at ports, searching for books and statistical records in shops and travel agencies. I failed to get a glass of water, so please excuse me if my voice isn't good. Let's see. Percy contributed a series of 49 articles to the youth's instructor in which he described their travel experiences and the places they visited. Well does the author remember how, as a child, she eagerly employed any adult who seemed to be enjoying a little unnecessary leisure to read aloud those round the world stories signed by P.T.M. On Sabbath, as soon as the table was cleared and the dishes stacked, she would bring out the instructor and, in imagination, tour the world while her 5-year-old sister colored pictures. When a year later Percy himself returned from his world circling tour, he often visited the 2 little orphans whose mother was dead and whose father was in faraway Australia. Percy would take Mabel on his knee, and Ella would sit close by, listening to fascinating tales of what he had seen on that memorable journey he had made with Elder Haskell. When en route to Africa, their steamer docked at Lisbon to take on coal, the passengers were permitted to go ashore. The travelers saw buildings that had been demolished by the great earthquake of 1755, and that was the Lisbon earthquake, and left in their ruined condition for nearly 150 years, a fulfillment of Bible prophecy, which foretold devastating earthquakes as a sign of the near approach of Christ's coming. The water carriers in Lisbon, called Gallegos from Galicia in Spain, numbered 3,000 among the city's population of 400,000. Said Haskell, "It is surprising to see what heavy weights they carry, suspended by a rope from a strong wooden barrel resting on a horseshoe-shaped collar placed on their shoulders as they trudge along in pairs, always out of step to neutralize the oscillation of their bodies." Excuse me, 2 men are said thus to carry, oh my, half a ton. The Portuguese have a saying, God made first the Portuguese, then the Gallego to wait on him. They saw many primitive ox wagons with solid wooden wheels and also many modern conveyances drawn by horses and mules. Of the pedestrians, he wrote, "The fish women are the most picturesque, having a broad-brimmed felt hat, indigo blue, closely pleated short woolen skirt, a loose jacket, and bare legs. Many of them are adorned with a profusion of gold ornaments. In this lies their wealth, which they ever carry with them. The city is scrupulously clean, and there are Protestant places of worship with the 200 public houses for that purpose. The Portuguese are noted for their politeness. The greatest liberty is granted to all, from all parts, to express their sentiments in the papers and by public speech, both in political matters and on the subject of religion." The next stop for the travelers was the island of Madeira. Here, as in other places, there is quite a proportion of English people, many having been recommended by physicians to come for their health. As soon as the anchor is cast, swimmers surround the boat, like so many seabirds, waiting for the passengers to throw over any coin from a halfpenny upward, when from one to a half dozen will dive for it, and the most expert will bring it up. They will also dive from the boat over the upper deck, a distance, we should judge, of not less than 50 feet. August 9, 1889, was a happy day as the Warwick Castle steamed into Cape Town harbor. They recognized among the crowds thronging the wharf a number of friends whom they had recently seen in England and America. The very next day after their arrival, Haskell, assisted by his secretary, um, launched into the task of gathering facts and general information that would serve as a guide to the General Conference in shaping foreign mission policies. In such a survey, he sought first to become acquainted with the country, taking particular note of features contributing favorably or otherwise to Adventist missionary enterprise. Haskell, a keen observer and a tireless gatherer of facts, whose conclusions were generally sound and practical, now considered what opportunities Africa might offer for literature evangelism. In this case, his conclusions were not encouraging. The English-speaking inhabitants were few as compared with multitudes of Africans, most of whom were illiterate. A large proportion of the white settlers were Dutch, a very religious but conservative people who spoke Afrikaans. At first, our colporteurs had worked successfully among them, but their predicants, or ministers, alarmed lest they lose members, warned their congregations against the Adventist salesmen. Many even named the colporteur and the title of the book he was selling. Most of the European towns were small, and even in them the African population predominated. Food prices were high, traveling and living expenses exorbitant. The farmers lived on large tracts of land, their homes being on the average 10 miles apart. About 1/10 of the Cape population were literate Muslims whose religion forbade the reading of Christian books. There was no way of making even an approximate count of the African population of the continent. Some estimated it to be 200 million, and others twice that number. This multitude was divided into numberless tribes, each with its own language or dialect. They were scattered the length and breadth of the continent. It was obvious to Elder Haskell that self-supporting colporteur evangelism would not be the answer among the African tribal people, but there must be an answer. What was it? The two men focused their attention on the educational systems of South Africa. Yes, they're in South Africa, a country, but I read earlier about the continent, but never, okay, we'll go on. The two men focused their attention on the educational systems of South Africa. They learned that the government maintained a high standard, using a system of grants and aids by which mission schools were encouraged and assisted, but not supported by the government. Education among all classes was promoted, with liberty to operate each school in any particular denominational pattern. It was reported that there were 700 mission schools in South Africa, all prospering, besides 54 special training schools for mission workers. Haskell and McGann decided to visit as many of these schools as their time would permit. One of the nearest was the Huguenot Seminary, about 40 miles from Cape Town. It was patterned after Mount Holyoke Seminary, an American college, and prepared young women for mission careers as well as more general aspects of Christian service. The two visitors found a beautifully landscaped campus in the midst of rugged mountains. They were warmly welcomed by the principal, Miss Ferguson, who devoted several hours to her guests. She told them that the school had first operated in 1874 with 40 students. An early rule was that each girl should be alone for half an hour every morning and evening. The first the first hour each day was given to religious instruction and discussion. Every evening, a 15-minute prayer meeting was held. At the beginning of that first year, only 1/3 of the 40 students were Christians. By the close of the first year, every girl was rejoicing in the Savior's love. At present, said Miss Ferguson, we have 250 girls in attendance. As she toured the institution with the visitors, she noticed that Elder Haskell was especially interested in the classes where, under supervision, students were gaining teaching experience. They were also studying methods of conducting mission schools and of training African workers to do the same. When she discussed the school's high literary standards, the men were interested, but when she showed them students actually baking bread, washing dishes, setting tables, laundering, and cleaning, she noticed they were greatly impressed. The grand purpose of the school was preparation for mission service. Their missionary society was supporting 2 European workers and corresponding with missions in various parts of Africa. Each Monday morning, replies were read before the entire school. The students also conducted branch Sunday schools in the vicinity for both white and black children. Religious prejudice had no place there. One teacher observed the seventh-day Sabbath and was enabled to do so without embarrassment or criticism. Elder Haskell wrote, Our interest in the schoolwork has been greatly revived since we visited some of the schools in South Africa and learned of their history and practical workings. The noble men and women who are engaged in this work will reap a harvest of souls for the garner of the Lord. If all of our schools under the control of religious teachers kept before their pupils some missionary work, they would accomplish 10 times as much for humanity as many do now. It is sowing for eternity, planting seeds that will blossom in the earth made new. We are in the world for the benefit of humanity, and it would be bigotry in the extreme to suppose that all good methods of instruction in this enlightened age of the 19th century are confined to any one denomination or class, or even to people whom God has called to do a special work. After an intensive study of South Africa and its problems, both Haskell and McGann were firmly convinced that the imperative immediate need of that land was Christian education, including practical training in farming, mechanics, industries, and trades. Large, undeveloped tribal areas desperately needed instruction in sanitation, healthful living, and the care of the sick. Doors to medical missionary work were open on every side, but where were the self sacrificing workers equipped with knowledge and a great love of humanity, enabling them to minister to soul and body? Many times Percy asked himself this question. It eventually led him to devote the latter half of his career to the building up of the College of Medical Evangelists, now the Loma Linda University School of Medicine, and to endeavor to plant in the hearts of its students a love for and a commitment to mission service. What Elder Haskell had learned of the work accomplished by various Christian denominations greatly rejoiced his heart. It had also increased his interest in the enterprise of training Adventist youth to fulfill the divine commission given the remnant church, that of proclaiming the special message due the world in this last hour. Next chapter is called An Adventurous Journey. During an extensive trip up the eastern coast of South Africa, the two world leaders visited Lovedale, the largest mission station in the area. As Elder Haskell has failed to leave any detailed account of their journeyings at this time, probably because of being fully occupied in fulfilling the purpose of his mission scouting trip. It will be given here in McGann's graphic language. Quote, at 6 a.m., the coach was advertised to start from the depot with passengers and mails, but it was more than an hour after that time when it put in an appearance, and all voyagers were requested to hurry up and take seats. We did hurry up, but to take seats was altogether another matter. The coach, or rather cart, was a two-wheeled concern with sitting space for 6, arranged 3 abreast on 2 seats, one behind the other. But these were hardly visible for the multitude of mail sacks that covered everything. They were piled on before and behind and under the seats and over them and out onto the pole in front of the dashboard. One of the party, apparently Elder Haskell, crawled in behind, and after making his legs perform a sort of corkscrew movement, managed to seat himself. The writer found a corner at his side. A young colonist perched himself beside the driver, and a gold digger took up his position on a heap of stable cargo in front. This completed the list. With the usual amount of shouting and yelling from the post boys and grooms, the start was effected, and soon the vehicle was under way, and whirling down the main street of the sleeping city, 6 Cape horses pulled us merrily along, the whole team being so poor that they scarcely made one good shadow. Our driver was an African, and armed with the typical bugle and 2 whips, with these he performed his duty with great adroitness. One of these scourges, for which they are little less, consisted of a light bamboo pole about 20 feet in length, with a rawhide lash some 10 feet long. This was applied to the leaders and mid-team. The other was hardly quarter the length, with a short, thick thong for the benefit of the wheel horses. The night had been rainy, and we soon became painfully aware of the fact, for the road was a case of alternate truck holes and camels' humps over which the chariot bumped in a merciless manner. The kneading and percussing and vibration received was sufficient to digest the heaviest dinner that mortal ever ate, but was to hygienists something totally unnecessary. With brakes set at full speed, the descent is made down one hill across the railroad track, and then in a gallop the steeds make straight up another. The cart reels and sways and tips heavily backward, and the Jehu, with a most complacent smile, informs the passengers that "another one of them, sir, and she'll tip over, so if you value your lives, sit forward." But we can't, for there's no room for our feet, and our knees are curled up in close proximity to our noses. So the risk must be run, and all relapse into silence and devote all their energies to holding on. A mountain range now appears in the offing, with a deep canyon running through it. Into this we enter, the road winding along on the side of the precipice. The scene is one of wild and almost gigantic grandeur. Above, on one side, towers rocks and crags for many hundred feet, some of them looking as if a touch would send them crashing down onto the road, from thence to be precipitated into the gorge below. This is filled with a jungle of euphorbias and cactuses and many tropical trees, covered with beautiful jasmine and a creeper known as monkey rope. The speed is breakneck, and when the bottom of Pluto's veil is reached, all breathe more freely. At Fish River, a halt is made for a change of horses, as these which have pulled thus far have commenced to show signs of weariness. Many ostriches are feeding by the wayside, but in appearance they are far different from the pictures in the old school readers. White feathers are much more profuse in the portrait than on the bird itself, and the ostrich that ran away from the hunter and buried its head in the sand thinking that because not seeing, it couldn't be seen, never breathed on the plains of South Africa, its native home. One blow of their foot is sufficient to break the back of a horse. The road now lay over a rough bush country, peopled for the most part by natives, their little round huts looking like beehives dotted all over it, all over the country. All the afternoon we journeyed, and at set of sun, on reaching the top of a small hill, beheld the village of Alice lying beneath, and just beyond the Chumie River stood the massive gray stone buildings of the Lovedale Mission Station. We were soon comfortably ensconced within its walls. End quote. Well, the next is a quote too, so we'll read on. Lovedale is more of an educational institution than a mission station proper. All classes of the African race are here, and representatives from almost, if not every, tribe. The Bible is made the main object of study, and a good common school education is imparted. There are at present some 400 students. Oh, it's 7:55. I the quotation goes on for a few more pages, so we're just going to stop there because um, that's the breaking point. There are at present 400 students. That's where we'll pick up next time. We're going to close with prayer now. Father, we do thank you for these interesting stories of the early development of the Adventist denomination in other countries. And Father, we want your truth about um, you and your Son to be spread also, and we want it to go like wildfire so Jesus can come. So please bless our efforts as we unify, as we work together, as we try to establish medical missionary work and other endeavors. Please bless us, especially as at the camp meetings that are coming up next month. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you for keeping us safe through another week until this time. And we ask that your angels will go with us as we continue um, through the coming week and until we meet again. Please bless each one and guide us in our study too, that we will individually be ready for the soon coming of Jesus, I ask. In Jesus' name, amen.